All right, welcome. Thank you so much for being here tonight. We are here to return to something ancient, something we may have never been taught but have always known. The myth we'll enter tonight is a story of loss, longing, and return, a story of drying out and coming home to the soul skin. And like all myths, it's also a mirror. What we see in it is our own. Oh, thank you so much for letting me know, Bridget. Can everyone hear me okay if I speak louder? Okay. I will remember to speak up. So I wanted to open with a short meditation. So if it feels comfortable, I invite you to close your eyes and come to your breath. And we'll do 3 deep breaths together. In through the nose and out through the mouth. And feeling the weight of our sits bones on whatever surface is holding you. Feeling how deeply held and supported you are. And now envisioning roots extending from your root chakra down through the floor, through the subfloor and foundation, through the dirt and the rocks, the magma, all the way down to the center of the Earth's crystalline core. And wrapping your roots around this crystalline center. Breathing in the life that's pulsing at the center of our planet as she holds us and renews us. We invoke and activate the violet flame. And I like to picture this starting around my crown chakra. And as it moves down, all tension and resistance or heaviness is sent down through our roots, down to the earth center, where it is transmuted. So feeling that light move down our bodies. And releasing through our roots to the earth everything that no longer serves us. The earth receives everything we give her and returns our energy to us cleansed and renewed. And when you're ready, you can take another deep breath in. Full, steady exhale. Wiggle your fingers and toes. And return back to the room. So my intention for us tonight is that we connect back to the pull of our own wild woman And whether you've returned to the wild once or 1,000 times, may her voice be that much clearer and stronger inside of us. And I am really excited to share this myth. This is one of my favorite stories from one of my favorite books, which I say all the time. So I feel like I shouldn't even be allowed to say it, but I have a lot of favorite books. This is Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. I actually got this book while I was pregnant on a trip to New York City. And then, as so often happens with books, I put it away. And I thought about it every so often and was like, I should probably read that. But I never did until right before my daughter turned 1. I went through a really big transition where my husband and I sold our house. We sold all of our stuff. We moved into an Airbnb. And then it became abundantly clear that our relationship was could not continue the way that it was. And so during last summer, my first summer single, as a single mom, my first summer single in 7 years, I came back to this book. For some reason, I hadn't sold it. I sold almost everything else. And just reading it, I mean, the whole book was like medicine. It was incredible. But this particular myth that we're talking about tonight was like reading my own story. There were so many synchronicities, specifically the 7 years. So the myth talks about a woman and a man who were together for 7 summers, and my relationship was 7 years. And then in the myth, there is a spirit child who is born, and having my daughter was like the biggest shift for me. And it's really hard to say whether I would have ever, I mean, eventually I think I would have, but having her present really woke me up to what I was not willing to tolerate any longer. So I have had the privilege of meeting so many women who have really similar stories of either narcissistic or abusive, other types of abusive relationships that have been part of their own awakening. And for many of them, having children was a big part of that clarity of like, something needs to change. I'm not doing this anymore. And if something is going to change, it needs to be me. And I'm not waiting on someone else to make that choice. So this myth is really meaningful to me. I hope it will be meaningful to you as well, regardless of your own personal background. I think that's part of the beauty of myths, is they're so universally meaningful. So I am just going to read the myth itself out loud from the book, and then I cannot recommend this book enough. The whole chapter, I wish I could just read all of it. I think that might be kind of it's not as much interaction as I wanted for this, and it might take a while, but I highly, highly recommend it, even if you just get it for this one myth. It's one of those books that is good to read like a chapter and then kind of let it process for a little while and then come back. I didn't read it like straight through like I do with most books. It took me most of the summer. So if you enjoy the myth, again, highly recommend it, because the author goes into so much of the symbolism and the archetypes, and we'll kind of do an overview of them, but I'll read 3 of them specifically that I felt like I really wanted to cover, and then we'll just kind of go over the general arc of the initiation that the myth covers. Sealskin, soulskin. During a time that once was, is now gone forever, and will come back again soon, there is day after day of white sky, white snow, and all the tiny specks in the distance are people or dogs or bear. Here nothing thrives for the asking. The winds blow hard, so the people have come to wear their parkas and mamleks, boots, sideways on purpose now. Here, words freeze in the open air, and whole sentences must be broken from the speaker's lips and thawed at the fire so people can see what has been said. Here, the people live in the white and abundant hair of old Anuluk, the old grandmother, the old sorceress who is Earth herself. And it was in this land that there lived a man so lonely that over the years tears had carved great chasms into his cheeks. He tried to smile and be happy. He hunted, he trapped, and he slept well, but he wished for human company. Sometimes, out in the shallows in his kayak, when a seal came near, he remembered the old stories about how seals were once human, and the only reminder of that time was their eyes, which were capable of portraying those looks, those wise and wild and loving looks. And sometimes then he felt such a pang of loneliness that tears coursed down the well-used cracks in his face. One night he hunted past dark, but found nothing. As the moon rose in the sky and the ice floes glistened, he came to a great spotted rock in the sea, and it appeared to his keen eye that upon that old rock there was movement of the most graceful kind. He paddled slow and deep to be closer, and there atop the mighty rock danced a small group of women, naked as the first day they lay upon their mothers' bellies. Well, he was a lonely man, with no human friends but in memory, and he stayed and watched. The women were like beings made of moon milk, and their skin shimmered with little silver dots like those on the salmon in springtime, and the women's feet and hands were long and graceful. So beautiful were they that the man sat stunned in his boat, the water lapping, taking him closer and closer to the rock. He could hear the magnificent women laughing. At least they seemed to laugh, or was it the water laughing at the edge of the rock? The man was confused, for he was so dazzled. But somehow the loneliness that had weighed on his chest like wet hide was lifted away, and almost without thinking, as though he was meant, he jumped up onto the rock and stole one of the sealskins laying there. He hid behind an outcropping, and he pushed the sealskin into his parka. Soon one of the women called in a voice that was the most beautiful he'd ever heard, like the whales calling at dawn. Or no, maybe it was more like the newborn wolves tumbling down in the spring. Well, no, it was something better than that, but it did not matter because what were the women doing now? Why, they were putting on their sealskins, and one by one the seal women were slipping into the sea, yelping and crying happily, except for one. The tallest of them searched high and searched low for her sealskin, but it was nowhere to be found. The man felt emboldened by what he did not know. He stepped from the rock, appealing to her, "Woman, be my wife. I am a lonely man." "Oh, I cannot be wife," she said, "for I am of the other, the ones who live beneath." "Be my wife," insisted the man. "In 7 summers I will return your sealskin to you, and you may stay or you may go as you wish." The young seal woman looked long into his face with eyes that, but for her true origins, seemed human. Reluctantly, she said, "I will go with you. After 7 summers it shall be decided." So in time they had a child, whom they named Uruk, and the child was lithe and fat. In winter, the mother told Uruk tales of the creatures that lived beneath the sea, while the father whittled a bear or a wolf in white stone with his long knife. When his mother carried the child Uruk to bed, she pointed out through the smoke hole to the clouds in all their shapes, except instead of recounting the shapes of raven and bear and wolf, she recounted the stories of walrus, whale, seal, and salmon, for those were the creatures she knew. But as time went on, her flesh began to dry out. First it flaked, then it cracked. The skin of her eyelids began to peel. The hairs of her head began to drop to the ground. She became Naluak, palest white. Her plumpness began to wither. She tried to conceal her limp. Every day her eyes, without her willing it so, became more dull. She began to put out her hand in order to find her way, for her sight was darkening. And so it went until one night when the child Uruk was awakened by shouting and sat upright in his sleeping skins. He heard a roar like a bear that was his father berating his mother. He heard a crying like silver rung on stone that was his mother. "You hid my sealskin 7 long years ago, and now the 8th winter comes. I want what I am made of returned to me," cried the seal woman. And you, woman, would leave me if I gave it to you, boomed the husband. I do not know what I would do. I only know I must have what I belong to. And you would leave me wifeless and the boy motherless. You are bad. And with that, her husband tore the hide flap of the door aside and disappeared into the night. The boy loved his mother much. He feared losing her and so cried himself to sleep, only to be awakened by the wind. A strange wind. It seemed to call to him, Uruk, Uruk. And out of bed he climbed, so hastily that he put his parka on upside down and pulled his mukluks only halfway up. Hearing his name called over and over, he dashed out into the starry, starry night. The child ran out to the cliff overlooking the water, and there, far out in the windy sea, was a huge, shaggy silver seal. Its head was enormous. Its whiskers drooped to its chest. Its eyes were deep yellow. The boy scrambled down the cliff and stumbled at the bottom over a stone, no, a bundle, that had rolled out of a cleft in the rock. The boy's hair lashed at his face like 1,000 rains of ice. The boy scratched open the bundle and shook it out. It was his mother's sealskin. Oh, and he could smell her all through it. And as he hugged the sealskin to his face and inhaled her scent, her soul slammed through him like a sudden summer wind. Oh, he cried with pain and joy and lifted the skin again to his face, and again her soul passed through his. Oh, he cried again, for he was being filled with the unending love of his mother. And the old silver seal, way out, sank slowly beneath the water. The boy climbed the cliff and ran toward home with the sealskin flying behind him, and into the house he fell. His mother swept him and the skin up and closed her eyes in gratitude for the safety of both. She pulled on her sealskin. Oh, mother, no, cried the child. She scooped up the child, tucked him under her arm, and half ran and half stumbled toward the roaring sea. Oh, mother, no, don't leave me, Uruk cried. And at once you could tell she wanted to stay with her child. She wanted to, but something called her, something older than she, older than he, older than time. Oh, mother, no, 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 cried the child. She turned to him with a look of dreadful love in her eyes. She took the boy's face in her hands and breathed her sweet breath into his lungs, once, twice, 3 times. Then, with him under her arm like a precious bundle, she dove into the sea, down and down and down, and still deeper down, and the seal woman and her child breathed easily underwater. And they swam deep and strong till they entered the underwater cove of seals, where all manner of creatures were dining and singing, dancing and speaking. And the great silver seal that had called to Uruk from the night sea embraced the child and called him grandson. How fare you up there, daughter? Asked the great silver seal. The seal woman looked away and said, I hurt a human, a man who gave his all to have me, but I cannot return to him, for I shall be a prisoner if I do. And the boy? Asked the old seal. My grandchild? He said it so proudly his voice shook. He must go back, father. He cannot stay. His time is not yet to be here with us. And she wept, and together they wept. And so some days and nights passed, 7 to be exact, during which time the luster came back to the seal woman's hair and eyes. She turned a beautiful dark color, her sight was restored, her body regained its plumpness, and she swam uncrippled. Yet it came time to return the boy to land. On that night, the old grandfather seal and the boy's beautiful mother swam with the child between them. Back they went, back up and up and up to the topside world. There they gently placed Uruk on the stony shore in the moonlight. His mother assured him, I am always with you. Only touch what I have touched, my fire sticks, my ulu, knife, my stone carvings of otter and seal, and I will breathe into your lungs a wind for the singing of your songs. The old silver seal and his daughter kissed the child many times. At last they tore themselves away and swam out to sea, and with one last look at the boy, they disappeared beneath the waters. and Uruk, because it was not his time, stayed. As time went on, he grew to be a mighty drummer and singer and a maker of stories. And it was said this all came to be because as a child he had survived being carried out to sea by the great seal spirits. Now, in the gray mists of morning, sometimes he can still be seen with his kayak tethered, kneeling upon a certain rock in the sea, seeming to speak to a certain female seal who often comes near the shore. Though many have tried to hunt her, time after time they have failed. She is known as Tongkikok, the bright one, the holy one. And it is said that though she be a seal, her eyes are capable of portraying those human looks, those wise and wild and loving looks. So, one of the really meaningful things about this myth is not just how it parallels real life experiences for many people, but each archetype in the myth represents a part of ourselves that we act out. And so the three that I'm going to read directly from the book are the lonely man, the spirit child, and then the part about drying out and crippling. So the lonely man represents our ego. And what's really interesting too, what I've noticed in my own journey, is that as I've been returning to my wild woman and my soul and learning to let my soul lead and not just lead from ego, I've also been developing a healthy ego. My background is like basically variations of lifelong abuse. And so this is also something that I know is common for people who've been socialized and raised as women. There's so much messaging that we receive about putting other people's needs in front of our own. So we're so tuned in to what other people need, how other people are feeling. And so part of our healing is also developing healthy boundaries, and that comes from the ego. So we're on this really interesting like parallel track where we are connecting back to our soul and at the same time developing our ego in a way that we haven't before, so that it's, not running the show, but it is supporting us and giving us like the container that we need to be able to live our outward life in a way that allows us to live from our soul. Okay, so the lonely man. In a story similar to the core of this one, it is actually a human woman who lures a whale man to copulate with her by stealing his fin. In other stories, the offspring is sometimes a girl, sometimes a fish boy. Sometimes the old one out in the sea is a venerable old female. Because there is so much gender exchange in stories, the maleness and femaleness of the characters in the story are far less important than the prescribed process. In this spirit, let us consider that the lonely man who steals the sealskin represents the ego of a woman's psyche. The health of the ego is often determined by how well one measures boundaries in the outer world, how strongly one's identity is formed, how well one differentiates past, present, and future, and how closely one's perceptions coincide with consensual reality. It is a timeless motif in human psyche that the ego and the soul vie to control the life force. In early life, the ego, with its appetites, often leads. It is always cooking something up that smells really good. The ego is very muscular during this time. It relegates the soul to back porch kitchen duty. But at some point, sometimes in our 20s, sometimes our 30s, most often the 40s, although some women aren't really ready until they're 50 or 60 or even in their 70s or 80s, we begin at last to let the soul lead. The power shifts away from bric-a-brac and frick-frack to soulfulness. And though the soul does not assume the lead by killing off the ego is demoted, one might say, and given a different assignment in the psyche, which is essentially to submit to the concerns of the soul. From the time we are born, there is a wildish urge within us that desires our souls lead our lives for the ego can only understand just so much. Imagine the ego on a permanent and relatively short leash. It can only go so far into the mysteries of life and spirit. Usually it becomes frightened. It has a bad habit of reducing all numinosity to a nothing but. It demands facts that are observable. Proofs that are of a feeling or mystical nature do not often sit well with the ego. That is why the ego is lonely. It is very limited in its constructs in this way. It cannot fully participate in the more mysterious processes of soul and psyche. Yet the lonely man yearns for soul, dimly recognizes soulful and wildish things when they are near. Some people use the words soul and spirit interchangeably, but in fairy tales, the soul is always the progenitor of spirit. In arcane hermeneutics, the spirit is a being born of the soul. The spirit inherits or incarnates into matter in order to gather news of the ways of the world and carries these back to the soul. When not interfered with, the relationship between soul and spirit is one of perfect symmetry. Each enriches the other in turn. In Jungian psychology, the ego is often described as a small island of consciousness that floats in a sea of unconsciousness. However, in folklore, the ego is portrayed as a creature of appetite, often symbolized by a not very bright human or animal surrounded by forces very mystifying to it, and over which it attempts to gain control. Sometimes the ego is able to gain control in a most brutish and destructive manner, but in the end, through the heroine or hero's progress, it most often loses its bid to reign. In the beginning of one's life, the ego is curious about the soul world, but more often it is concerned with fulfilling its own hungers. The lonely man in the tale is attempting to participate in the life of the soul. But like the ego, he is not particularly built for it and tries to grab at the soul rather than develop a relationship with it. Why does the ego steal the sealskin? Like all other lonely or hungry things, it loves the light. It sees light and the possibility of being close to the soul, and it creeps up to it and steals one of its essential camouflages. Ego cannot help itself. It is what it is, attracted to the light. Even though it cannot live under the water, it has its own yearning for a relationship with the soul. The ego is crude in comparison to the soul. Its way of doing things is usually not evocative or sensitive, but it has a tiny and dimly understood longing for the beautiful light. And this, in some way, and for some time, calms the ego. So, in a hunger for soul, our own ego self steals the pelt. Stay with me, whispers the ego. I will make you happy by isolating you from your soul self and your cycles of returning to your soul home. I will make you very, very happy. Please, please stay. And so, as is right in the beginning of feminine individuation, the soul is pressured into relationship with ego. The mundane function of the soul's subservience to the ego occurs in order for us to learn the world, the ways to gain things, how to work, how to differentiate good from not so good, when to move, when to stay put, how to live with other people, all the things of the outer life. The initial purpose of developing such an important construct within a woman's psyche, the marriage of the seal woman and the lonely man, a marriage in which she is definitely subservient, is to create a temporary arrangement that will ultimately produce a spirit child who can cohabit and translate in and between both the mundane and the wildish worlds. Once this symbolic child is born, developed, initiated, it resurfaces into the outer world and the relationship with soul is healed. Even though the lonely man, the ego, cannot dominate forever, for someday it must submit to the demands of soul for the rest of a woman's life. By living with the seal woman, soul woman, it has been touched by greatness and is therefore gratified, enriched, and humbled all at the same time. And this is such an interesting parallel and a good reminder, too, about we talked a lot about this in my interview with Rachel during the summit, how the outer circumstances of our lives mirror the initial traumas that we go through when we are in our early stages of development in childhood, as like kind of a cosmic play, so that we have the opportunity to witness these aspects of ourselves like projected into our external world and learn what it is that we need to break the cycle and how to stand up for that inner child, younger part of us. So the spirit child is the result of the ego and the soul like intermingling in this earlier phase of differentiation and development. We see that the union of opposites between ego and soul produces something of infinite value, the spirit child. And it is true that even when the ego roughly intrudes upon the more subtle aspects of psyche and soul, a cross fertilization is taking place. Paradoxically, by stealing the soul's protection and its ability to vanish into the water at will, the ego participates in making a child who will claim dual heritage, world and soul, one who will be able to carry messages and gifts back and forth between the two. The spirit child is a miracle child who has the ability to hear the call, hear the far-off voice that says it is time to come back. The child is a part of our medial nature that compels us, for it can hear the call when it comes. It is the child rising out of sleep, out of bed, out of the house, and out into the wind-filled night and down to the wild sea that causes us to assert, as God is my witness, I shall proceed in this way, or I will endure, I shall not be turned away, or I shall find a way to continue. It is the child who brings the sealskin, soulskin back to his mother. It is the child who enables her to return to her home. This child is a spiritual power that impels us to continue our important work, to push back, change our lives, better the community, join in helping to balance the world, all by returning to home. If one wants to participate in these things, the difficult marriage between soul and ego must be made. The spirit child must be brought to life. Retrieval and return are the goals of mastery. Regardless of a woman's circumstances, the spirit child, the old seal who rises up from the sea calling his daughter home, and the open sea are always near, always, even in places and times one might least expect them to be present. In the sealskin soulskin story, the seal maiden tells her child stories about what lives and thrives under the sea. She instructs through her stories, shaping this child who is born of her union with the ego. She is forming the child, teaching it the terrain and the ways of the other. The soul is preparing this wildish child of the psyche for something very important. And the drying out and crippling is what happens when we live too long without our soul skin, when we're performing survival at the cost of our aliveness. Most of a woman's depressions, ennuis, and wandering confusions are caused by a severely restricted soul life in which innovation, impulse, and creation are restricted or forbidden. Women receive enormous impulse to act from the creative force. We cannot overlook the fact that there is still much thieving and hamstringing of women's talents through cultural restriction and punishment of her natural and wildish instincts. We can break away from this condition if there is an underground river or even a little freshet pouring from somewhere soulful into our lives. But if a woman far from home surrenders all power, she will become first a fog, then a vapor, and finally a wisp of her former wildish self. All this secreting away of a woman's natural pelt and her subsequent drying out and crippling reminds me of an old story that circulated in our family among several old country tailors. My late Uncle Vilmos once told it to calm and teach an angry adult in our extended family, one who was being too harsh with a child. Uncle Vilmos had infinite patience and tenderness towards humans and creatures. He was a natural storyteller in the Mes Mondok tradition and skilled in applying stories as gentle medicine. A man came to a Zabo, tailor, and tried on a suit. As he stood before the mirror, he noticed the vest was a little uneven at the bottom. "Oh," said the tailor, "don't worry about that. Just hold the shorter end down with your left hand, and no one will ever notice." While the customer proceeded to do this, he noticed that the lapel of the jacket curled up instead of lying flat. "Oh, that," said the tailor, "that's nothing. Just turn your head a little and hold it down with your chin." The customer complied, and as he did, he noticed that the inseam of the pants was a little short, and he felt that the rise was a bit too tight. Oh, don't worry about that, said the tailor. Just pull the inseam down with your right hand, and everything will be perfect. The customer agreed and purchased the suit. The next day, he wore his new suit with all the accompanying hand and chin alterations. As he limped through the park with his chin holding down his lapel, one hand tugging at the vest, the other hand grasping his crotch, two old men stopped playing checkers to watch him stagger by. Oh my God, said the first man. Look at that poor crippled man. The second man reflected for a moment, then murmured, Yes, the crippling is too bad, but I wonder, where did he get such a nice suit? The reaction of the last old man constitutes a common cultural response toward a woman who has developed an impeccable persona, but who is all crippled up with trying to maintain it. Well, yes, she's crippled, but look at how nice she looks. Look at how good she is. Look at how well she's doing. When we become dried out, we try to walk all crippled up in order to make it appear that we are handling everything, that all is well, and just so. Whether it is the soul skin that is missing or the culture made skin that doesn't fit, we are crippled by pretending it is otherwise. But when we do this, life is diminished and the cost to ourselves is very high. When a woman begins to dry out, it becomes harder and harder for her to function in the hardy, wildish nature. Ideas, creativity, life itself thrives on moisture. Women in this condition often have dark man dreams. Thugs, prowlers, or rapists threaten them, hold them hostage, steal from them, and far worse. Sometimes these dreams are trauma dreams arising from an actual assault, but most often they are dreams of women who are drying out, who are not giving care to the instinctual side of their lives, who steal from themselves, deprive the creative function, and sometimes make no effort to help themselves, or else work very hard to ignore the call back to the water. Over the years of my practice, I have seen many women in this dried out state, some mildly affected, others more so. Concomitantly, I have heard from the same women many injured animal dreams, these increasing dramatically in women and men over the last 10 years or so. It is hard not to notice that the increase in injured animal dreams coincides with the devastations to the wilderness, both within and as well as without of people. If the culture prohibits an integral and sane life for women for whatever reason, she will dream injured animal dreams. Though the psyche makes every effort to cleanse and strengthen itself regularly, every lash mark out there is recorded on the unconscious in here, so that a dreamer carries the effects of losing her personal ties with wild woman, and also the world's loss of relationship with this deep nature. So sometimes it is not only the woman who is drying out. Sometimes essential aspects of one's microenvironment, the family or the workplace, for instance, or one's larger culture, are caking and cracking to dust also, and these affect and afflict her. In order for her to contribute to helping right these conditions, a return to her own skin, her own instinctual common sense, and her own return to home are necessary. As we have seen, it is hard to recognize our condition until we become like Seal Woman in her distress, peeling, limping, losing juice, going blind. So it is a gift from the immense vitality of the psyche, then, that there is deep in the unconscious a caller, an old one who rises to the surface of our consciousness and begins to incessantly call us back to our true natures. So the author, this woman, Clarissa Estes, is also a doctor, and I believe she has, well, obviously she has a private practice. I believe she's a psychologist. So that's what she's referring to in her practice. So the arc of the initiation is a 7-part framework, and there's the theft of the pelt, where the ego yearns for a deeper experience but tries to control us out of fear. There's the compromise, where we pretend to survive without the soul. The drying out, when the soul starts to wither. And then the old one's call, when the walrus is calling to the spirit child out in the sea. If we don't return on our own, the old one, our soul, will come for us, and the wild psyche will call until something in us responds. And then the spirit child, Uruk, was restless and having trouble sleeping. The restlessness we feel when we are yearning to return to our psychic place of origin is often accompanied by irritability and a sense of being lost. These feelings are a message for us to come home. It's not just simply that we're burnt out. Our soul is starving for that reconnection. And then the descent to the sea is when we begin the process of our soul retrieval. Although there are many physical places one can go to feel her way back to this special home, the physical place itself is not home. It is only the vehicle that rocks the ego to sleep so that we can go the rest of the way by ourselves. The vehicles through and by which women reach home are many: music, art, forest, ocean, sunrise, solitude. These take us home to a nutritive inner world that has ideas, order, and sustenance all of its own. And then finally, as we've integrated all of these pieces, we become the medial woman walking between worlds with our soul intact. So this is when we transcend the binaries, which reminds me so much of the Temperance card and the tarot. We learn to live as a new third creation, like an option that's outside of the illusion of duality, that contains and transmutes the illusions of opposites that are all around us in reality. So the medial woman stands between the worlds of consensual reality and the mystical unconscious and mediates between them. She is the transmitter and receiver between two or more values or ideas. She's the one who brings new ideas to life, exchanges old ideas for innovative ones, translates between the world of the rational and the world of the imaginal. She hears things, knows things, and senses what should come next. The seal woman also tells her child only to touch what she has touched, so is her fire sticks, her knife, and her carvings. And in return, she will breathe into his lungs a wind for the singing of his songs. So these items all have symbolism as well. The knife, similar to the sword in tarot, symbolizes insight, our willingness to cut away what is no longer needed, to make clear endings, and to carve new beginnings. The fire sticks are our own fire making ability and the way that we rise from failure, create passion, and of course, burn something to the ground if it's necessary. And then the stone carvings embody the memories of our wild consciousness and union with the natural instinctive life. So Uruk becomes a drummer, a singer, a storyteller, and he is living what the soul has breathed into him through what he creates. And actually, in this deck, I always have to look at the box. It's above me. The Untamed Elemental. I never remember what it's called. So one of the cards is breath, and I've gotten that. I feel like I keep getting that. And breath and the word inspiration have the same root word. And inspiration is often referred to as like the breath of the divine. So when we have this connection with our soul and we are prioritizing our intentional solitude to reconnect to our own wild woman, we have this much more fluid access to our intuition and our creativity and like the flow of life, the flow of the divine through us. This is a quote from Carl Jung. It's very abridged, but he said, "When spirit becomes heavy, it turns to water. Therefore, the way of the soul leads to water." And the return to home in the intervals of conversing with the seal from the rock in the sea, as Uruk, as an adult, returns to the sea and makes time to go back and speak to his mother in the early morning hours, are our acts of innate and integral ecology, for they are all a return to the water, meeting the one who above all others loves us with profound endurance. And then we get the privilege of being the one to love ourselves the most and prioritize ourselves and know that regardless of what happens in our outside world, we have our own backs because we have that connection to our soul and to the divine that we are. So if you brought a journal or some paper, have access to something to journal, I have 4 journaling prompts here. I will read them, I'll post them in the chat, and we'll take, let me see, I think let's do 10 minutes for journaling. And you might spend all this time on just one of them. You might be able to get through all of them. But you are welcome to return to them as you need them. And this would also be a great, if you do tarot or oracle cards, this could be a really fun spread to do. So the first prompt is, what part of me has been drying out without my noticing? What part of me has been drying out without my noticing? When have I played the lonely man, grasping, performing, or controlling instead of trusting? When have I played the lonely man? Who or what has been my spirit child, the part of me that won't let me sleep and hears the call? So, what part of me has been my spirit child, or who or what has been my spirit child? The part that won't let us sleep when it hears the call. And then, where am I ready to say I am going, even if I don't know where it leads? Where am I ready to say I am going, even if I don't know where it leads? I'll put these in the chat and we can take until, I'll check in around 7:05 and just see how everyone's doing with time. We can be flexible with this. And like I said, you might just want to focus on one. You might get through all of them, just depending on how it feels for you. Hey, welcome back. I would love to open space to hear any insights or anything you'd like to share, either from the myth or the journaling that you just did, or if you have something from the summit that you wanted to share about. I am here for it.
Okay, I'll share the answer that I got to the first question, I guess. So for that is the what part of me has been drawing out without my noticing.
Mm-hmm.
And I grabbed my deck for this just because it's hard to like reflect on the fly.
Yeah.
So I called in some help for that. And it was actually judgment that flipped right out at me, which I think is really interesting. And what really stood out to me about this is kind of like the being the call and also like answering it. I think that with life, you know, life just kind of bears down on you and you get kind of timid. I think at my core, I'm pretty fierce and I'm unashamed and very forward about who I am and what matters to me and what I'm going for in life. And I noticed that about the card as well. Like there's really no hesitation like in the figures at all. Like they're very arms outstretched. Like there's no hesitation or doubt. And I think that has been drawing out for me definitely. Yeah, just being afraid of like outwardly putting myself out there and like kind of making my stake in the sand and sounding my call, I think is kind of something that I got to work on because that's part of my soul. So yeah, that's what I got for that one.
That's beautiful. That's such a good reminder. I really love that. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Yeah, and yeah, just while I'm on, thanks so much for the summit. It was amazing and
Yeah.
really helpful. So
Oh,
thanks.
well, thank you. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. It's really special to hear from people. And if anything else comes through for anyone after we close, then please feel free to message me or just write it down, continue journaling, because it'll keep going. It'll keep working on you. So, but I love hearing from everyone. And thank you again so much for being here. It's so special that I get to share what I love and what I'm passionate about with other people. So it really means a lot to have you in this space with me. And just as a thank you, I am offering a special rate on my one-on-one sessions for the month of July. So I'm going to put the link for that in the chat. That's just for this group. So that I recommend saving that. But yeah, if you would like support with your own initiation journey and returning home to your wild self, anything that you're moving through, I know having support has saved me so many times. And yeah, it's just something I'm so grateful for, and I know how it feels to like be really, really alone. And that's something that yeah, I love being able to support through. So as we're closing today, we can take some deep breaths together. And remember that the pelt may be hidden, but it is never gone. The soul waits for us to remember. And when we do, we will know how to find our way. And I invite you to keep a dream journal over the next couple of days if this isn't already practice that you're doing. Um, I know often I hear people say that they just don't remember their dreams. And even just having the notebook there next to your bed and physically writing out an intention before you go to sleep. I think the one I usually use is I request a psychic dream from my subconscious that I remember when I wake up, something like that. Like it can be anything really. Um, and then if you wake up, literally just absolutely anything you remember, any sensations, colors, or just how you feel when you wake up, write that down. And if you get absolutely nothing, just writing down that you don't remember anything is still like searing that pathway in your brain, and that will help build the muscle to start remembering more of your dreams. But they're such a beautiful opportunity to hear from our soul and our subconscious, and it's really interesting to like go down a rabbit hole of dream interpretation or work on your own intuition and sit with the different aspects of the dream yourself and ask them, you can meditate, ask them what messages they have for you. I use sometimes tarot if I'm feeling just very like, I know this is meaningful, but I'm like so lost about this. So there's so much you can do with that, but our dreams are such a gift for us. And if you're already doing that or that doesn't interest you, I also invite you to set a reminder to create some intentional solitude for yourself over the next couple of days and just keep a record of what comes through for you when you're practicing being in communion with your soul. And, it doesn't have to be, I think, one of the biggest things that keeps us from doing this is feeling like, I know for myself, it's like, well, if it's not this like big ritual, then it's not good enough and I just don't end up sitting down and doing it. But we can be in intentional solitude in a room full of people, or just for like 60 seconds in the middle of what we're doing, or tuning in when we're washing the dishes. So there's always the space for us to do that. It just takes us deciding that we're going to follow through on that and knowing that we're absolutely always worth taking that time for ourselves. So, yeah, thank you again so much for being here. I'm always here if you need support, and we're going to have another circle next month. I would love to see you. But I really appreciate you showing up tonight. It was really, really wonderful to share space with you.
Thanks so much.
Bye, Sarah.
Bye.